Hello listeners, my name is Charlotte Barlow. I'm a senior analyst in Aurora's GB and Ireland advisory team, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's Special Careers podcast episode, Graduate Analyst Program Explained. Today we're sitting down with my guests and current graduate analysts Daniela Quiroga and Joe Saffa, who will share their first-hand experience of working at Aurora on the Graduate Analyst Program. At Aurora, we offer our graduates a 21-month program during which they can take part in up to 3 rotations in teams within our business. At the end of their 3rd rotation, they move into a permanent position with one of our teams. To learn more about our graduate programs and how to apply, please visit auroraer.com/grads. Now that the official business is done, let's dive into the podcast. Welcome, Daniela and Joe. So, to start, please could you tell our listeners a bit about yourselves? Where do you come from? What made you want to apply to Aurora's analyst program? And what is your academic or prior work experience in? Starting first with Daniela.
Yeah, thank you, Char. I'm very happy to be here. So before joining Aurora, I used to work in Chile doing advisory projects for the public sector on climate change, environment, and energy topics. I'm an engineer and I moved to the UK to study economic policy at LSE. And I did an internship at the International Energy Agency in Paris. And that's actually where I stumbled upon Aurora's name. So when I saw the job opening, I decided to apply and well, here I am.
Okay, wow. Really interesting. And also, I wouldn't say it's the most orthodox route to Aurora. It sounds like you've had a bit of a journey in the energy market, then moving to the UK, and then kind of finally landing at Aurora and focusing on the GB power market, which I'll be asking you about your experience looking at the Chilean market versus the GB market in just a moment. But Joe, could you also let our listeners know how you ended up to be at Aurora?
Yeah, of course. I think mine is a more of an orthodox approach to Aurora. I come from a physics background, as a lot of people at Aurora do. I did my undergrad at UCL, and then I went on to do a master's in energy technologies at Cambridge, which is where I found out about Aurora from someone who'd done my course before and went on to do the Aurora grad scheme as well. So he recommended Aurora, I applied, and that was that.
And now it would be useful if you guys could talk us through a little bit of how the application process was for you. What were kind of the key milestones in the process? How did you find the general run through from start to end, kind of starting with kind of putting together your CV, etc., interviewing to then actually joining the company? Perhaps Daniela could start with your experience.
Yeah, sure. So I remember actually that it was a pretty straightforward process. I sent my application. I heard back a couple of weeks later. I started with some online tests that measured quantitative skills and behavioral stuff, and then swiftly moved into the interviews. I remember having 3 interviews. One was online, 2 of them were in person. And basically there I was asked to do some case studies. But overall, it was mainly a pretty relaxed conversation where I could get a sense of what Aurora did, whether I'd be a good fit, and just asking all of the questions that I had. So I remember it as a pretty straightforward, swift process.
And Joe, for you, did you kind of have the same experience? Was it also quite straightforward, stepwise?
Yeah, I think I'd echo everything Daniela said, particularly the in-person interview. I was very well structured. There was, I think, 2 different interviews and a case study. And I think that in-person interview was part of what considered me to accept the role in the first place, because the interviewers were really interesting. It's good conversations with them. And the whole day was one of the better interviews I did.
Great. Good to hear. And I think also Joe, from my experience, was quite swift in terms of the timing from submitting your application to going through the process of those online tests to in-person interviews, and then finally actually hearing what the outcome was. I think for myself, it was within a couple of months. Was that similar for yourselves?
Yeah, it was a very quick turnaround and found out quite early in the year. So I'd only really just started my master's when I applied, and then I still had another probably 9 months or so to go between getting the offer and the role starting.
And I think that's quite nice to have a bit of peace of mind then as you're kind of completing your studies, that you already have something lined up for you at the other end. Did you feel that it kind of made that rest of your studies almost a bit more relaxed and that you could really enjoy the process as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you don't have to worry about applying for the things when you get into the heart of the end of your degree. Yeah.
What kind of interaction did you have with Aurora in between being accepted for the program and then actually coming and arriving at Aurora? Because it's still a bit of a lengthy period it can be between that acceptance and then actually joining. So what were the level of communications like in between that period?
For me, it was like I needed a lot of communication because I'm under a skilled worker visa. So I had a lot of questions of how the process was going to work and how actually that process could be coupled with the fact that I had a couple of holidays planned. So over the 9 months in between I received the offer and then I actually started working, I had several emails coming in and back with PNC, which were actually really, really helpful in all of the decisions that I had to make. Also, I was living in London, so I had to move to Oxford to join Aurora, or I decided to move to Oxford to join Aurora. So they were also pretty helpful in giving us information about where are the best place to live in, what kind of things I can expect from different neighborhoods. And yeah, all of those sorts of things. I think it was overall a pretty seamless experience.
That's great. And just to reiterate there, with the graduate program, it's not necessarily expected that everybody has to move to Oxford for the job, although it is, hybrid working in person as well as at home. A lot of the graduates, I believe, from your cohort decided to move to Oxford to kind of make the most of living in this wonderful city. But pivoting now towards Joe and trying to understand a bit more about the onboarding process. So you've been accepted to Aurora, you've had a bit of communication with our people and culture team about any of the teething movements in terms of maybe it's a visa or maybe it's accommodation, etc. But now you're here, you're at Aurora, it's your first day or your first few weeks. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about the structure of the onboarding training program? What did it involve? And yeah, just a flavor of what those first few weeks look like.
Yeah, of course. So I think the program is actually very well structured in the first few weeks. There's a very detailed training program laid out where in your first few weeks you have scheduled sessions with experts from Aurora who'll guide you through certain topics that are important to the job, whether that be using some of the software that we might use or teaching you about different parts of the market that you would need to know in your job. And that is spread out over your first few weeks. And this is good and it allows everyone to come up to the same level. As we mentioned, people come from all kinds of different backgrounds. So whether you know more about the engineering side or the finance side or whatever, everyone will get that grounding in your first few weeks in the training period. And then after that, I think it kind of depends what team you're working in, but you still have occasional training sessions throughout your time at Aurora as you begin to start shadowing and eventually doing work.
Yeah, and that's a good point to mention that Aurora has its kind of own internal Aurora Academy that's functioning 24/7 to allow all different members of the whole company to be involved in training, not just within that first onboarding process, but kind of throughout their time at the company. But Daniela, given that you have kind of prior work experience before joining Aurora, how useful did you find the onboarding training program for you? What was kind of unique about it? Did you feel it, equipped you well for your first graduate rotation? Yeah, how is it for someone that's coming in with a bit more work experience?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely useful. So yeah, for me, it was mainly about learning how the GB power market worked. So I'm actually quite familiar with the Chilean power market, but of course, the GB one is very different in nature and also has its own policies and schemes that I had to get familiar with. So having all of this introductory training, I think, was actually pretty helpful in being able to start working, at least knowing the basics of everything. Mind you, there's actually like one thing that I want to highlight, there are a lot of trainings coming in the beginning of the program, and you're not expected to finish them being an expert on every single thing. But for me, I think having the material to go back was very, very useful, especially in the first weeks into the job.
Definitely, definitely. And would reiterate that those first few weeks of training are more just to get people familiarized with concepts. And I would say even, you can be on the job for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you're still learning so much about different, unique niche aspects of the market all the time. So I would definitely say that working at Aurora is, you have that initial upfront, dense onboarding training, but it really kind of continues throughout your career here, which is great. But also just to ask a bit further then, so how did you find that ramp up between, so you've had a few weeks of onboarding and now you're more formally introduced to your team in your first rotation. Daniela, how did you find that ramp up onto your first project or first task?
Yeah, so I started my first rotation in the research team, and yeah, I actually found that the ramp up was very, very relaxed. So when you start working, people are really mindful of the fact that this is the first time you'll be seeing certain topics, and they're always open to discuss them in order for you to understand them better. So definitely, I'd say in comparison to other jobs I've had, this has been the most relaxed onboarding process I've encountered.
That's great. Yeah. And definitely people are very amenable to wanting to help people learn and to come up that learning curve so that we can all kind of grow into these market experts that we all kind of hope to be. But moving forwards now, you've both been at Aurora for a little over a year. I've had the pleasure of working with you both in your current second rotation, which is with the GB and Island Advisory Team. Joe, could you give our listeners a bit more of a taste of what you've been working on in the advisory team since you've joined us?
Yeah, of course. I think my work in advisory has probably not been your typical advisory work because I've been on the same project for the few months that I've been here, whereas a lot of the time in advisory you tend to be on many short-term projects. But I'm actually on a really interesting project where we're advising the Northern Irish government on the design of a new renewable support scheme. So we basically given them our recommendations of how we think the auction should be run and what the certain parameters should be. And then they're going to take this away, and hopefully we'll see the fruits of Aurora's labor at some point in the next couple of years when the auction takes place.
And just for the context of our listeners, I think this has been a particularly interesting project for you to get involved in. Given your first rotation was in the Irish research team, I think that this provided yourself with such a strong foundation in terms of Irish market knowledge that you could then apply that to this really exciting advisory project. So yeah, really exciting to see this kind of tie over between rotations and personal growth and development there. But Daniela, before you joined our advisory team, you were also in another research team. Could you talk us through maybe a little bit more of what our research teams actually do? So advisory, projects, as Joe alluded to, are more project by project kind of consultancy style, but with a more advisory angle to it. But what's kind of an analyst's role within the research team? And perhaps you could give us a highlight from your time in research as well.
So my first rotation was in the power and renewables research team, which is the team that is responsible for developing our market forecasts and also researching and analyzing the impact of relevant topics and changes in the market. So as an analyst, the main responsibility is gathering insights, working with and interpreting data, identifying main findings and the story behind them, and obviously communicating your main results. And I think what I enjoyed the most about that role was the problem-solving aspect of it. So basically, you're given a lot of freedom and time to investigate the issues and propose solutions. And actually, it's a great, great learning experience, especially when you're in the beginning of the grad program here. Another part that I personally quite enjoyed was that you have the opportunity of presenting your findings both to the team, but also to the clients, which obviously helped refining my communication skills because you have to translate all of this complex analysis that you're doing on a day-to-day basis into clear insights, and you get to share your ideas with other professionals, other experts in the industry. And that is really, really fulfilling. You asked about one of the highlights, and I think the highlight in my case was participating in group meetings. So group meetings are instances in the research teams where you can present the main results of your analysis to clients in person. And throughout my rotation, I had the chance of working on 3 of them, actually. Contracts for different schemes, capacity market, and the evolution of demand. And those were, I think, the main highlight of my rotation. I was able to deepen my understanding of policy impacts, market mechanism, and it was quite challenging, but also quite rewarding.
These are all really big topics in the GB market. So I think being able to have that exposure to all of those in what I would say is actually quite a short amount of time is really amazing. And I think also being able to have that trust in terms of between yourself and your team and communicating all of these complex findings to clients directly is, again, something that's quite special, I think, in terms of Aurora and the team structure. But just moving on to now, I think we've delved into a little bit of the advisory team and the research team and some of what you guys have been up to, but perhaps we should kind of take a little bit more of a step back. And I think it would be useful for our listeners to understand what an actual what your day-to-day life might look like when working at Aurora. So Joe, do you mind describing your typical workday at the moment in the advisory team?
Yeah, of course. So it varies day to day, but it's usually a 9 a.m. start. And then on most days, we have an advisory team morning meeting where everyone from the advisory team gets together and we'll discuss what projects are currently ongoing, who's working on them. And then sometimes we have deep dives into certain topics that are interesting that someone may have worked on recently. Then after that, every day, there's a project check-in with my project team, where we discuss the plans for the day and who needs to do what. And then just crack on with the work that you've discussed that needs to be done until lunchtime. And at lunch, people tend to get lunch together. We're right in the center of town here, so there's plenty of options nearby to go and get food. And then after that, continuing with work. And then usually we have a project checkout meeting at the end of the day where you discuss what's been achieved in the day and whether we're on track and what else may need doing over the next few days. Then even after work, it doesn't necessarily stop. There's often things going on. I think, as Daniela said, a lot of people tend to move to Oxford for this job. So there's a lot of social activities that go on if that's something you're interested in. For example, I'm a member of the Aurora football team, and we have like social football sessions once a week. And we also have a five-a-side team that people can join. And I know there's a lot of other clubs and things that people can also take part in after work.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that Aurora is a very social company. Got Aurora's football team, Women at Aurora, Aurora's Run Club. I think there's a book club. I think there's even maybe a manga club. You can often find these kind of sub clubs in Teams channels to kind of find groups of like-minded people. And I would definitely say that, aside from all the oodles of market knowledge developed on the daily, it's really the people, I think, that make Aurora such a great company to work for. And kind of on that train of thought, Daniela, could you describe for our listeners what your relationship is like with your graduate cohort? Because, of course, within the grad program, it's not just been the two of you that have joined, but you came with a full group of incoming grads. And yeah, what's your relationship been like with the other grads?
Yeah, sure. So I think my cohort is definitely one of the highlights of working in Aurora. So as Joe mentioned, the majority of us moved to Oxford when we joined, and we didn't really know a lot of people here. We had the opportunity before joining Aurora to meet each other. We had a WhatsApp group created. Some people met beforehand. Some of them actually coordinated to live together. And in the beginning, the very first weeks, we had these training sessions, which actually allowed us to meet each other, all of the analyst grads, but also the modeling grads. So it was pretty good for having faces that you like, familiar faces on the very first days of the job. And yeah, I can say I've made really good friends within the cohort. Today, we meet after work, during weekends, and they're definitely the core of my social life here in Oxford.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything that you said. And I think, entering a grad program, you can often wonder how your relationship might evolve with your peers because, yeah, you just never know what kind of that culture is going to look like. You all have a similar role, but I think the beauty of Aurora's graduate program is that at the end of the program, you're all kind of guaranteed essentially work within one of the teams, which completely reduces any, threat or risk of having this competitive environment. I would say that we pride ourselves on being a very friendly organization. And I don't know, Joe, if you were to describe Aurora's office culture in 3 words or kind of, yeah, your sense of feeling of the company as a whole, how would you describe that? Just to give our listeners a better sense of what it is to work here.
Yeah, so I think one you just said is friendly. Um, Definitely. Also, we just talked about social. I think it's a very social culture here at Aurora. And then also helpful. I think one of the things I most like about working at Aurora is the people. They're all friendly and always willing to give a helping hand when they can. And yeah, the social aspect makes it a really fun place to work.
And also, if you don't mind me asking as well, we've spoken a lot about the relationships with grads, but how do you find your relationships with, other members of the team, whether that's your line manager or just other colleagues? How do you find kind of the cross collaboration within your team as well, Joe, if you don't mind answering that?
Yeah, of course. I think that there definitely is no kind of split in the company between grads and non-grads. Everyone's equally friendly and willing to help. And I think it also helps that a lot of people in the company have also come through the grad scheme. So they've been in the position that you're in a year ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's also really useful to have, or at least I've found that I think I'm iteration number 3 of the grad program. You guys are iteration number 4, and you have others above you to look up to in terms of, seeing how they've developed within the company and knowing that that's kind of a rough benchmark to show how one can evolve and develop within a company outside of graduate program has been something for me personally that's been really, really useful. So, Joe, I might just ask you this question, given that you've fairly recently come out of university. What advice would you give our prospective graduates who are, you know, looking at entering the energy sector and who might be anxious to jump into it? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think if you're looking to get into this sector, my first advice would be go for it. It's a fascinating sector to be in right now. It's very globally relevant, and there's always something new to learn and new perspectives to get. And I think if you're looking at energy industry broadly, as I was when I was looking at what to apply to a year ago, a power market forecasting company like Aurora is a great place to start because you really get to see every side of the industry. And I've learned so much in my year here.
I think another quote, I can't remember who said this, but always kind of knowing your why and why you're wanting to enter that space and what you're motivated by. So, Daniela, what would you say, a person looking to enter the graduate program, what would that person typically be motivated by in terms of, deciding that they're going to enter the power market space?
I think if you're a person who's naturally curious and enjoys continuous learning, you're definitely going to thrive in this job. The energy sector, as Joe said, is very dynamic. There's things happening every single day, new policies, new regulatory changes, technical innovations. A lot is happening. So if you have a genuine interest in the sector, you'll find this job to be very interesting. You also need to be analytically driven, I'd say. Definitely, we spend a lot of our time doing this complex analysis on a day-to-day basis. So I think if you like that, you'll definitely enjoy it here.
If we focus now specifically onto the actual application process, what would be your 2 pieces of advice, Joe, for those that are about to enter the application process?
My first piece of advice to those considering applying would be to do it, to apply. You won't regret it. And secondly, during the application process, I would say don't stress too much about knowing everything about every power market. I think as long as you show that you have the analytic ability, as Daniela said, and show that you're interested in the market and in energy, then that's what's more important.
Great. Daniela, do you have any wise words?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what Joe said. You're not going to be expected to be an expert in power markets during the interview. You do want to showcase, however, your analytical skills, your curiosity, interest in the market, and most importantly, just stay calm, be yourself. People are really nice here, so you don't need to be nervous.
So maybe to summarize, it's interest in the sector, but you don't need to know everything. Interest and perhaps a knack for analysis, and then just to relax and enjoy the process, I guess. Fantastic. So thank you both for being such great and open guests. For those listening and thinking of applying, for more information about all of Aurora's graduate programs around the world, as it's not just the one based in Oxford, please do apply or sign up for our mailing list by visiting auroraer.com/grads. Thanks for listening.